Yo, the votes are in from ACC Media Days, and the Miami Hurricanes are picked to win the Coastal. Not the ACC, but the Coastal. So, can we keep recruiting the type of players that can actually get us winning the conference in years to come? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host. I'm a University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, including pregame and postgame for Miami Hurricanes football. And thank you so much for making Locked On Canes here today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube as well. So they finally tallied those votes from the media who attended the ACC kickoff last week, and they do have Miami. They received 96 votes, winning the Coastal, fending off the likes of Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech and UNC to win that Coastal Division. They've got Clemson winning the Atlantic, and they do have Clemson winning the conference. So if it does come down to Miami versus Clemson at a championship game, they're expecting Clemson to get back to the top of that ACC mountain. But it's been a busy couple of weeks in recruiting, and I want to dive headfirst back into it. So let's bring on our very good friend, John Garcia from Sports Illustrated. I want to remind everyone that John Garcia Jr. joins us weekly thanks to LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn Jobs/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. John is the director of football recruiting for Sports Illustrated. John, thank you so much for stopping by. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Alex. It's a busy time of year. It just seems like we keep saying that, but yeah, even after a little vacation, jumping right back into it, a lot of Miami targets and national targets coming off the board right before the season begins. So yeah, there's a lot of names to sort through.
Miami fans were sweating over the weekend when they got word that four-star linebacker Malik Bryant was postponing his announcement. He was getting the crystal balls for Miami and really worried he's postponed it. Does that mean he wants to go to Florida? So it didn't happen. The announcement did not happen Saturday. I will say that even though he postponed it, the buzz has gotten even more positive in Miami's favor. There's been some really good reporting on that, and there's actually more crystal balls now coming in pointing Malik Bryant to Miami, and word that he could announce this week as soon as later on today. So what are you hearing on Malik Bryant?
I'm hearing similar, Alex. I think going into it, there was several weeks of Miami buzz, but right before we got to that July 20th sort of window, I started hearing a lot of Florida buzz. I heard the Gators had really kind of doubled down on that pitch to Malik. You know, they've got their own IMG pipeline growing. He's a former IMG player at this point, and I heard some of those connections were coming back around for the Gators' favor. So the moment I heard that he might postpone, I thought that would be good news, depending on how long he postponed it. You know, I thought if it was a day or two, it would probably still be good news for the Gators. So my gut was still there. But now, following the weekend into this week, like everyone else, I'm hearing more about Miami pulling back even or ahead of Florida in this race. And I think it shows you just how contentious this thing has been for Malik. He's an elite linebacker who could rush the passer. He could play off the football. He could fill the alley. He's really a three-down prospect that has this specialty as a pass rusher that you truly want in this day and age of college football. So naturally, Florida and Miami going back and forth. And I think in terms of the head-to-heads between the Canes and the Gators, this one feels as close as Jaden Rashada did at one point, where you're like, this thing was Gators. He pushes it back, and you're like, wait, will Jaden get down to Miami? Yes. As soon as he took the visit, you're like, okay, Miami's race to lose. Miami wins out in the recruitment. Not as cut and dry for Bryant, especially because we don't know how far he's pushing it back. But my gut is if he is pushing it back just to this week, I think the buzz for Miami is still tangible and strong. But if it starts to leak into August and into deeper into the fall potentially, I do think then it could bounce back and forth towards Florida. Or one source told me a dark horse could come in. Alabama could swoop back around, maybe a USC. So I do think the timeline here is really critical for Bryant. Sooner the better from the Canes perspective, and probably the Gator perspective as well. It still feels pretty close.
I have heard from a few Alabama fans, like they found me. I don't know what's going on, but I've got
Because
like a
you're the man.
few,
That's why.
and it's all love because I don't mind when people come in and talk a little trash. I enjoy reading the comments, but there's a handful of Alabama fans who have found the show, and every time I talk about like a player Miami is targeting, they're all like, "Oh, don't even Alabama's going to come in and take this guy." Like they say it, they've been saying it about Okunlola, they've been saying it about Malik Bryant as well. Yeah, but as far as weird recruiting stories go, your job is very interesting every single day. Give me your perspective on what happened this past Saturday with Peyton Kirkland. Now, when it actually came down to Kirkland making his announcement, I wasn't expecting Miami to land him, but really up until so he makes his announcement, I think it was on Saturday or what, yeah. And so earlier that day was when people started to hear a lot of buzz for Texas, who he ultimately committed to. But I don't think he made a visit there, and they weren't on the graphic, like they weren't considered a finalist. So how does he go from not considering Texas to announcing Texas? And what was it like covering that?
Well, it is a great example of how one things can shift so quickly in recruiting, just in general, right? You think these are my options, and then you find out, well, maybe not. And then you have to react from there. So I think it's a good example of that. And it's also a good case study on timing. I think if Peyton Kirkland commits in April or May, every offer's on the table. He's a take at every school. There's space, there's movement for him afforded at all these places. But I think because a lot of big fish along the offensive line started committing to Miami, to Florida, to Oklahoma, three of his legitimate finalists, and maybe the top three in his brain a week ago, the spots started to fill up a little bit. So I'm not sure when he was aware of that and had to create this Texas momentum. But a couple days before the announcement, yeah, I got a text from a good friend that you and I both know who said, "Hey, I'm hearing Peyton Kirkland to Texas," and I'm like, "The Longhorns, like University of Texas?" I'm like, it was. Are you sure you're not talking about Oklahoma? They were in it. Texas's main rival. He goes, no, Texas. So yeah, that was surprising to me. But then you start to kind of put all those dominoes together, and you start to understand, that hey, options change. I
Yeah.
think we look at recruiting as, hey, every hat on the table is the same value, and you have the same spot at every school. It's just not the case. And again, there's been this rush. We've talked about it all summer. June visits, July decisions. I mean, the whole world has come off the board, it feels like, in college football recruiting in the last month or so. So being on the tail end of that is a little bit risky relative to some of the positions that are open. So that's why the buzz with Kirkland has shifted so much. In the early spring, it was all Florida. Then Miami started to push for some of this buzz into the month of June, maybe even all the way into July. He took officials to Michigan State and Oklahoma. Both of them had brief moments of
Mhm.
capturing the most buzz with Kirkland. And there was never a mention, there was never a visit or even the possibility of a visit with Texas. And according to Peyton himself, yeah, he started to see what was happening. The writing was on the wall, and he made a phone call to Kyle Flood, the O-line coach at UT. And apparently there was space, even though they had 4 O-linemen already on board. So he decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and commit sight unseen, which used to be a thing more than it is now, especially with a kid committing in the summer. Usually when a kid commits to a school that he's never been to, he's either a late riser, he comes out of nowhere and it's signing day and there's just not a lot of time to take visits, or there's a dead period, something like that. Or it's a kid who has that familiarity with a coaching staff and just kind of trusts, hey, I don't need to take this visit. I know what these coaches are going to do. But of course, that doesn't really resonate with Kirkland in any event. Although Sarkisian and Flood were at Alabama, Kirkland was a target early on for the Crimson Tide, but it's hard to imagine a truly fostered relationship between both parties more than 2 years ago at this point for a kid who committed this weekend. So kind of crazy, certainly rare. And obviously surprising those last couple days hearing the Texas buzz. And then on top of it, Peyton is like tweeting against Texas, right? Like he sees the buzz. He's like, this is fake news. I think he swore against Texas at one point, and he even asked, like, why would I go to Texas? I mean, he was a fan, it seemed like, for a part of that. So truly bizarre in that regard to either smoke screen it and ham it up to the point where you're pushing back against it, or to, have that late true change of heart and surprise a lot of people along the way. Just definitely something we don't see a lot on the recruiting trail. But when you're recruiting the state of Florida, you got to be ready. We've got unique personalities in this state that are willing to bet on themselves. And I think he's a great example as to both of those points.
Sure do. And there's a number of other players we want to get John's take on. So make sure you keep it locked here. A wide receiver who Miami is seemingly on 0 to 60 with in a very short period of time. There's a big defensive tackle who's got Miami on his list. I wonder if there's something brewing there. We still need to talk with John about a couple of offensive linemen, including a 6'7" monster from the state of South Carolina. So keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes, and make sure you check out our great partners at betonline.net. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for your sports wagering info, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. John Garcia, head of football recruiting from Sports Illustrated, joins us. John, the last couple of days, there's been a lot of buzz about a 4-star wide receiver. He's played high school ball to this point at Dade Christian. He's transferring to Avant Garde, which I don't know a whole lot about, but I like this player. Yeah, nobody seems to know a lot about Avant Garde, but we're talking about wide receiver William Foles, who people have been sending me a lot of messages. I've been talking to some people about him, where it looks like Miami is a very strong favorite. He's going to make his announcement August 3rd. I'm expecting him to pick Miami. I'm not allowed to log crystal balls, but I've logged a Donno ball for William Foles to Miami. What can you tell me about this player and Miami's pursuit of him?
Well, first of all, the player, I mean, just a big physical, productive prospect, 6'2", 200 pounds, and plays like it. He's not a finesse player in any way. He's great after the catch and just hard to deal with for the conventional corner, even in the South Florida or state of Florida area. And he's dominated really at every setting, playing at Dade Christian, double-digit touchdowns, despite missing some games last year as a junior, while being the focal point of really the entire team, which is kind of hard to do down here in South Florida. And then in the offseason, man, every camp, every 7-on, this kid strikes you with his physicality because he looks like he's already in college. So again, 6'2", 6'3", 200 pounds, and cut up pretty well, long arms, kind of high-waisted, exactly how you'd build kind of a conventional wide receiver one. And he flashes all the time. He was the MVP among receivers at the Under Armour Miami camp, which was the last time I saw him. Loved him that day. And from that point, his recruitment has started to change. It looked like that day he said, hey, I'm going to probably go out of state for college. He was looking at Georgia, Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin had just offered him. Texas A&M was involved. So you kind of understood, okay, yeah, I mean, big receiver, physical prospect, SEC, we get it. But then it's completely done 180 since that point. And now it looks like Miami is the favorite and Florida State is the primary competition. So from a kid who thought he was leaving the state to one who's maybe focused on 2 of the 3 Power 5 schools in the state, pretty interesting turn of events. But just like we talked about with Peyton Kirkland, the board changes. And I think, there's a million good receivers in the state of Florida. So it's hard to figure how that Miami board looked in January and how it's shifted to this point. There's some big wins on there, right? Ray Joseph flipping from Clemson was as big as it gets for Miami, but then you lost the commitment of Andy Jean from Miami Northwestern. So there's a give and take there. Jaylen Brown commits to LSU, and now all of a sudden you're not scrambling, but you're reshuffling the deck a little bit. But locally, because you're in South Florida, there's multiple big physical targets to fill some of that counter to what Ray brings as more of a slot type of receiver. And your William Foleses, your Ikeem Williamses of the world really, fill that void in Dade and Broward County respectively. The difference is that Foles is ready to commit now. And I think he's felt that Miami love over the last few weeks, in particular, after Gene's decommitment. He looks like he might be a Florida Gator before all is said and done. So I think if Miami has realized that, which if we're talking about it, they probably knew about it ahead of time, you start to shift the board on your own end. And I think that's sort of the circumstance to where Foles became a little bit more of a realistic option. And again, the size, the production, the location certainly lends itself towards, it being a popular pickup should he pick Miami. Florida State has prioritized him, I would say, longer than the Canes, and they've gotten him on campus recently as well. But so is Miami, and there's kind of a doubling down on keeping kids local, which is priority one for Mario Cristobal, and that offensive staff has a lot of optimism around it. We've seen this recruiting run Miami has been on. It's been more quarterbacks and big guys up front, but now I think it's going to start reciprocating more with wide receivers and skill position prospects as well. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think Foles is a Cane on August 3rd. He's been tweeting about this commitment and building his own buzz in the process. So I think he's going to be your typical South Florida chip on your shoulder kind of receiver, especially because he's not as highly ranked as some of these other guys. And I think that'll be a good thing for Miami, both now and certainly when he gets to campus.
This has to be one of the first times in this cycle where Florida State is even in the same mix with a Miami player, which is just interesting to me because when you look at the players Miami is after, you tend to see Florida a lot, even if Miami's winning most of those battles. I have to throw that in there, John. It's a quota. I need to trash Florida on every single episode.
Understood.
You see Alabama in most all of these, LSU makes appearances and all that, but you rarely see Florida State in the mix for the same players as Miami. What's going on in Florida State? Is Mike Norvell asleep at the wheel?
I wouldn't go that far, but look, it's definitely different. Like you said, Alex, I mean, these primary battles in Florida have Miami competing with the Gators most likely in state, and then it's the big boys out of state. It's Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Georgia. A&M is going to factor in for some of these South Floridians like they do every cycle. That's been the primary competition. So you've seen Miami win some of those, and it's a head-turning moment. And then you've seen them lose a few, right? Jonel Aguero over the weekend picks Georgia, and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. But it's not Florida State and even Florida for a lot of these prospects. And I do think that says a lot about Florida State's trajectory in this class. I mean, outside of the offensive line position, where I actually think they're building a pretty nice class, there's a whole lot of question marks on that FSU commitment list. And other schools have been able to come into Florida and even the Panhandle and Tallahassee in particular and pull prospects out. Amari Borden is committed to Stanford. Raylan Wilson was committed to Michigan. Now he's flipped to Georgia. Makari Vickers has a lot of Alabama buzz. He's a kid from Tallahassee. I mean, so there is legitimate concern, not just because I'm on a Miami podcast, but it's not even about FSU being third in the state. It's about FSU falling maybe further down that list, as time goes on. And that's something that honestly should really never happen. And I think that's part of the reason why there's still so many unanswered questions, despite Norvell being, I think, the longest tenured coach between Miami, Florida State, and UCF with Gus Malzahn. So, yeah, that's certainly something to keep an eye on. But there's no doubt that both Miami and Florida have surpassed Florida State in recruiting tangibly and in the expectation department, which is, again, not something you want as a Florida State fan, given that UF and UM have rookie head coaches, at least at the schools that they're at.
Now, UCF is trying to climb that ladder. Their fans would tell you they're already at the top,
National
2017.
champs.
Exactly. National champs. And they are trending for a really good player, John. And like I'm not trying to turn this into a UCF podcast because I wanted to bring this player up because Miami are also among his finalists. But John Walker, 310 pounds, 6'3", defensive tackle out of Kissimmee. So he's in that area. He's a local player for them. He put out his announcement date is going to be 6 p.m. on Thursday, and his finalists are Florida, Ohio State, Michigan, UCF, and Miami. And I've noticed most of the crystal balls being logged for that player are now the ones that have come out the last couple of days because there was Ohio State buzz earlier, but the predictions coming out the last couple of days are pointing him to UCF, but Miami is in that mix. So what can you tell me about John Walker?
Old school interior defensive lineman. I mean, this is a guy who 5 years ago we'd be like, hey, that kid's an SEC kid. He's going to help stuff the run against LSU or Bama or Georgia, wherever he's headed. But yeah, his recruitment has gone much more national than regional. And we've seen buzz shift with him. John does a really good job of keeping things close to the vest. And I think that's why there's been some uncertainty around just where he may be leaning. I think there's been buzz with all 4 of the 5 schools that he's listed. I think Michigan's maybe on the outside looking in compared to the other 4, but earlier in the spring, there was some Miami buzz. Florida started to combat that later in the spring. And then once we got into the summer, it felt like he was Ohio State's maybe to lose. But now here, just a couple days before the commitment goes down, yeah, there's a sense that UCF might be able to keep him home, which would be just huge for Gus Malzahn and company. They've worked the portal well. They've worked the region well, and they've even gone, outside of the Southeastern footprint. But in terms of keeping elite Orlando natives home, it's been tough because of Miami's resurgence, because of Florida's resurgence, and then other schools are still recruiting the area consistently as well out of the state. So it's been tough sledding for Gus Malzahn on the recruiting front. So a banner win like this, I think, would really go a long way. Not only is he an Orlando guy, like you said, coming out of Kissimmee, but a true position of premium. I mean, an interior defensive lineman is something everybody needs. So to win against pure Power 5 and national programs, including some in the state, I think would say a lot for this UCF class, which probably needs some juice at this point. I think they're a little bit under expectation in terms of how they've been recruiting in their own right. So I do think this could be a nice Kickstarter if Walker elects to stay home and play for the Knights as they head into the Big 12.
Now, UCF is not a finalist for David Hicks, who's from the state of Texas. I think he's the top-ranked defensive tackle still on the board. Very different player from John Walker because he's smaller and quicker. He's like the new breed of defensive tackle. Earlier this month, he released his top 7, which are Alabama, Miami, Michigan State. So you can already see great company here. Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, and Texas A&M. Texas A&M are considered the favorite. Is it just me, or things seem pretty quiet for David Hicks at the moment? Obviously, this is a player I would love Miami to land if they could.
Yeah, Miami's done their right work here. This was a guy that Cristobal and his staff were recruiting when they were at Oregon. Again, big national recruit for multiple years already. So we've seen Miami have success with those guys, right? Francis Mauigoa, Riley Williams, who committed earlier this month. Certainly Jaden Wayne, the pass rusher from Tacoma, Washington, now at IMG. All those guys were Cristobal targets at Oregon. So there's been some carryover success. And I think all of those were at one point kind of upsets, right? I mean, Mauigoa was at one point seemingly destined for the West Coast or the SEC. I think Wayne at one point he named Alabama his leader. Riley Williams is a kid from Portland. So the Oregon Ducks were always kind of the layup school to pick for him, even having changed coaching staff. So Cristobal has played from behind for some of these Oregon and Miami carryover targets. And I think the biggest upset would be if Hicks were able to pick the orange and green when all is said and done. Because one, that offer list, or that top group, I should say, is truly national. I think more national than we've talked about with almost all these kids. A&M is certainly the favorite in-state. Texas isn't going anywhere in-state. They've got as much momentum as anybody. But here's the thing. He's in no rush. He's only taken a few visits. He has taken a Miami official already. So you wonder, if you're a Miami fan, hey, how do I gauge David Hicks? See if he gets back for a game. See if he can get down to Coral Gables, or even see Miami on the road at some point. I think that could be an extra shot of energy for the Canes, because this recruitment looks like it could go all the way to December, to the All-Star circuit in January. So you want to just kind of hover and stay in that 3 to 4 range. We know Texas A&M is going to be there, and then other teams have popped in and out from a buzz standpoint. Michigan State, Oregon, chief among them, and maybe Miami's in that group as well. But I do think that they just need to maintain at this point, because this is a long-standing recruitment. Cristobal may have a chance to go visit him at his house before all is said and done, when the in-home visits start late in the year. So there could be some late play here for Miami. And again, Cristobal has created some upsets with some crossover recruits that he initially targeted up at Oregon. So you certainly shouldn't count out the Canes at this point, especially with so much time to go.
Keep it locked right here to Locked On Canes. Got to ask John Garcia Jr. about a couple of offensive line targets when we come back. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts, and available free on YouTube. So Tommy Kinsler is a couple days away from making his announcement. 3-star offensive lineman who was committed to Florida, decommitted. Miami's been the favorite. The announcement's coming up. What can you tell me about Kinsler? Do you think he's going to be a Cane? And also, what can you tell me about the recruitment of Monroe Freeling, who's 6'7" offensive tackle, physical freak from South Carolina? I've heard Miami is turning up the heat on him.
Yeah, I'll start with Freeling real quick, Alex. Miami got that official visit and really resurged up his list. He put out, I think, a top 7 like in May, and then the next day Alabama offered. So we knew Alabama was going to start to crash this party, but Miami has been the one to crash it from an official visit standpoint. I do think Bama's going to get him on campus this weekend, so we'll see if they start to factor in more. Again, you want to recruit at the top. This is who you're going to have to beat for prospects. And we're talking about it with Samson Okunlola, Francis Mauigoa, who's committed to Miami, Jaden Rashada. The list goes on and on. You've got to play against Bama and Georgia and A&M in addition to the in-state rivals. So I think Freeling is going to be another good case study in that regard. His family was able to come down to Coral Gables with him. They really enjoyed it. I think his mom tweeted out something Miami related like 2 days ago. I mean, there's certainly some staying power with that hurricane angle, but there is this sense of maybe Bama and Clemson, being the in-state school, pushing late and having some sustainability in this thing. But I don't think there's a clear timeline for Freeling as well. So I do think that Miami's kind of like with Hicks, you got to have some staying power and stay in that race until the end. But the good thing for the Canes is that this offensive line board could be filling up by that point. And maybe Freeling would be looked at as a luxury by the time he's ready to commit. Because with Tommy Kinsler, it seems like the moment he decommitted from Florida, this was going to be Miami's race to lose. And we talk about that head-to-head recruiting. I think Rashada hurt Gators fans the most, but tangibly, this would be a flip essentially because, Bruno, as he's known as, decommitted shortly after committing to Florida in the first place because of Miami's push. He took kind of an under the radar visit down to Coral Gables, and really the momentum has not slowed down since then. And I think he's an interesting prospect, 4-year starter from Ocala Trinity Catholic, one of the better schools that have produced a ton of offensive linemen over the years. He wants to play tackle, but he's got some guard ability as well, and a great guard frame as a high floor prospect on top of it. So I think this would be a really nice get for the Canes as you start to fill out this O-line class that by the time the dust settles, Alex, I think is going to be maybe the best O-line class in the country when all is said and done. I mean, when you got Mauigoa as your anchor and Okunlola as a potential target down the line, it almost doesn't matter who you fill it in between. It's going to be good. But Kinsler, Antonio Tripp, some of these other players are really rock solid for the offensive interior. So I think this will be basically an entire offensive line brought in the first full cycle under Cristobal, which is probably what we should have expected.
It's fantastic. Last thing, I've got some personal news that I think our listeners and viewers are going to like. For as hard as John Garcia tried to keep me out of the club, I'm going to be taking my talents in addition to everything we do here on Locked On Canes, which is not stopping. It's only ramping up. But I'm going to be working with allhurricanes.com, which is the Miami branch of Sports Illustrated. We're going to be covering Canes football, whether it be fall camp coming up, all the practices, all the games, and recruiting. I'm going to be joining the team there on SI's Miami page, allhurricanes.com. So I want you guys to blow it up. I want you to follow All Hurricanes on Twitter. You should be following already, but if you're not, follow them. I want you to bookmark allhurricanes.com and be on that site every single day, because even before I get in there later this week, they're already producing amazing content covering recruiting. They covered the ACC kickoff. They're going to be covering fall camp coming up and the what do they call that? Canes Fest coming up in a couple weeks. So guys, make sure you blow up allhurricanes.com. John, thank you so much for not telling Sports Illustrated forget about this guy and keeping me out of those velvet ropes. I appreciate everything you do, sir.
Well earned, Mr. Donno. Looking forward to seeing the writing prowess. If it's anything close to what we get in this medium, then I think it's going to be a superstar pairing, and I'm excited to read your work in addition to listening and watching, my friend.
Yeah, it's like across my writing, it's like Ernest Hemingway meets Charles Dickens meets J.K. Rowling. It's all in there. I have a lot of influences in there. Make sure you guys follow John on Twitter at John Garcia _Jr. Check out his coverage, Sports Illustrated and SI.com. John, thank you so much. We'll talk again next week, sir.
Sounds good, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And guys, make sure you get more on the ACC by making Locked On ACC your second listen every day. Candace Cooper and the local experts of Locked On take you across the conference in 30 minutes. Make Locked On ACC your second listen. Make us your first listen again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.